So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the very first Fatal Flaw Salon. My name is Paul H. Curtis. I am the events and community coordinator for Fatal Flaw. And on behalf of everyone at Fatal Flaw, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. When Abigail Wessel and Brenna McPeak founded Fatal Flaw, I think the idea of building community was really at the heart of what they set out to do. I know that so many of us have found our way to Fatal Flaw because we were excited to find a publication that really took seriously the idea of fostering a community of writers and artists, and especially emerging writers and artists. So the Fatal Flaw Salon series is kind of the next step in this project. So with the salons, we're hoping to foster ongoing conversations on the kinds of subjects that all of us as writers and artists have on our minds. And there's maybe nothing more relatable than tonight's topic, which is acceptance and rejection. We are so honored and excited to be joined tonight by a panel of amazing guests. We have Chelsea Jackson, the managing editor of the Main Review, Rowana Abbensetts, founder and editor-in-chief of Spoken Black Girl Publishing, Michelle Champagne, the editor-in-chief and flash editor of Susurrus Magazine, and our very own Shannon Elward, fiction and nonfiction editor of Fatal Flaw Literary Magazine. And we're so pleased to have Laura Venita Green.
The lid brush of
Laura Venita Green, one of Fatal Flaw's favorite authors, with us to moderate our conversation this evening. So Laura, Chelsea, Rowana, Michelle, and Shannon, thank you so much for joining us tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to Laura. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Paul. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura. Very happy to be here with you tonight to discuss acceptance and rejection. It's a subject that's near and dear to my heart because I'm at the point where I'm finishing up a linked story collection and submitting my work as much as possible. Literary magazines are essential to so many of us trying to build a career, find community.
facial steamer.
It's a good time to make sure that you're muted. So make sure that your mic's muted. So
there we go. There we go. Perfect. Okay.
And did that. So we're good.
Okay, great. Literary magazines, yes, they're so essential to many of us writers trying to build a career and find community. Just under 2 years ago, Fatal Flaw gave me the gift of my first publication, and it was huge for me. Gave me so much confidence to get my work done, keep putting my stuff out there, which has thankfully led to more acceptances. But putting your work out there also inevitably leads to rejection. Last year alone, and I counted for the sake of this panel, I racked up over 60 rejections, and I'm expecting even more this year since I'm submitting more. My most recent publication was in a magazine that had already form letter rejected 6 of my other stories. So yes, rejection is disappointing and frustrating, but I've 100% come around to the belief that it's an unavoidable part of the process and that persistence is key. So I am thrilled to talk to our panel of editors today about their take on acceptance and rejection, what happens on their side of publishing, what decisions they're making behind the scenes, and how these literary magazines are made. We only have an hour and it's going to slip by way too fast, so I'm going to jump right in. Audience members, if you have questions along the way, just type them into chat, and I'll try and work as many of them as possible into the conversation as time allows. Generally, I'll be addressing a question to a specific editor in turn and then opening it up to the rest of the panel for further conversation. But I do want every panelist to answer this first key question and give us a chance to get to know you and your organization. I'll start with Chelsea Jackson, managing editor of the Main Review. Chelsea, tell us a little about your work with the Main Review. Tell us about your organization and some specific qualities or factors that your literary magazine looks for in what they choose to publish.
Yeah, so hello, everyone. I am the managing editor of the Main Review, which means that I am basically a point of contact and a bridge between the genre editors and the writers that we're accepting and working with, as well as our readers and other members of the team. And so I kind of handle a lot of the behind the scenes mechanics of everything that's going on, kind of have a hand in everything, and I have to kind of know all of the different wheels that are kind of turning at any given time. And so the Maine Review is a 501c3 organization or a nonprofit. And contrary to popular belief, you don't have to be from Maine to submit, and you don't have to be from Maine to work with the journal. So I myself am not from Maine, have never been to Maine, unfortunately. I'm in Richmond, Virginia, but our writers and editors are all across the country, and we work primarily remotely. And overall, the Maine Review is really just dedicated to making writing and reading creative work very accessible, you know, and kind of demystifying some of the processes around that. And specifically, if you go onto our website, and I'll throw it in the chat, but we do value things like sustainability and like very poignant kind of work. We accept poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction. We kind of run the gamut. And we also have something called a radical series, which is interviews with authors that are publishing new work, as well as a book review section. So we kind of do a lot, and we are shifting to a biannual structure and online only. So that's an overview of the journal.
Great, thanks so much. Next, we have Rowana Abbensetts-Dobson, founder and editor-in-chief of Spoken Black Girl Publishing. So yeah, Rowana, please tell us a little bit about your work there, some of the qualities you look for, and what you choose to publish.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for having me this evening. So Spoken Black Girl was founded around 2016, and it's really a space that kind of is open to discussions on mental health, healing, and wellness, specifically for Black women and women of color. This was just an area that I felt was lacking in the publishing industry. And I really wanted to give voice to writers that I felt were marginalized, and just amplify those voices. So we do like so much, like from the magazine to open mic events to workshops. Like, you know, one thing that we do is like the Healing Through Writing workshop. We try to do monthly, just to give, you know, folks a space that is, you know, safe and welcoming to express themselves and be in community, like you were talking about with Fatal Flaw having such a strong sense of community. I feel like that is one of the main attractions of Spoken Black Girl, is we have like a really strong community, and it's somewhere where, you know, all different kinds of creatives can come together. And I've seen so many different collaborations come out of the community, which is like amazing. But yeah, we try to keep it inspirational as far as like what we're looking for in pieces to publish. I know I definitely, like, we have, you know, every issue has like its different theme, from like resilience. Diaspora was kind of like talking about like global Black voices, and then the latest issue is freedom. So I try to have stories where I'm giving people a space to kind of like dream and be inspired and hopefully come away with something new. So I try to lean more towards that rather than you know, doom and gloom, which there's a lot of that in the world as well, and there should be space to discuss that as well. But I try to keep a balance in terms of like what we're looking for editorially. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Michelle Champagne, editor-in-chief of Susurrus, a literary arts magazine of the American South. Michelle, tell us about the work you do and what your magazine's looking for. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Hold on. Oh no, the video went, of course, because I turned on the sound. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. Uh, I started the magazine with friends about 2 years ago, and we kind of were talking about commonalities that we had, and it was this Southern identity that we didn't really like know what to do with, you know. We've I think like in terms of what we look for, the South is such an expansive place. I think in a lot of people's imaginations, they kind of have one idea of what it is. So we're always looking for pieces that expand the idea of what people think like the South is, you know, like who Southerners are, what Southern culture is. Because you know, there's so many states that are categorized as the South. There's so many cultures that are down in the South. Where I grew up in Georgia, was a place where there were a lot of my friends were first generation. They were first gen in their family, and I think like expanding that idea of the South and kind of I kind of wanted to like start this kind of like little magazine and create a community, a space online, another space online for Southern writers and artists to kind of come together. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Shannon Elward, fiction and nonfiction editor of Fatal Flaw. So yeah, talk about Fatal Flaw and your role, Shannon.
I am the fiction and nonfiction editor. Fatal Flaw is we like to call it our pandemic baby because it was birthed in our pandemic. It was originally supposed to be a reading series and it turned into a magazine. And we look for work that, well, for me, like I love work that makes me think and like offers me a different perspective on life. We do it through our themes. We're open for submissions, everyone. And our theme this time is agency. Basically what we're looking for is just, you know, we look for all types of work. We publish all sorts of things, from stories to like genre fiction to everything. We just love work that takes us into the creative, and that's what I look for when reading, and love editing. As like what I do is I have a hand in like everything. I read and I edit. And we do events like this, which is the heart of what Fatal Flaw loves. We love community and helping writers at every stage of their career, and we hope to do more of it.
Okay, great. Rowana, I'd love for you to take the lead on this next question. At Spoken Black Girl, do you often accept pieces that need more work, or do they need to be ready for publication? So how would you recommend writers prepare their work before submitting to set it up for success?
Ooh, that's a good question. So we primarily focus on emerging writers because I just feel like, you know, that's where my heart is helping, you know, quote unquote, the baby writers come up and, you know, enter that world of publishing. But as we get more and more submissions, look, I would say that the competition kind of gets a little bit more intense. Like our last issue, we had like a lot of submissions, and it just came to a point where it was like, you know, most people were on like a really high level. There was like a large group on a high level. So it just kind of came down to we had like our editorial staff, and we were just kind of like, you know, what stood out, what, you know, felt fresh, what haven't we seen before. And as far as like preparing, I would say, you know, definitely workshops. You know, come to workshops, you know, read your work, see how it's received, share your work with friends. Like sometimes, I mean, I'm a writer myself, and sometimes I'll have something that's just like written in my notebook. And then when I share it with someone else, I'm like, ooh, that was like better than I thought it was. So, you know, the work tends to come alive a bit once you share it with someone else. So I would say that that's a really great way to prepare your work for publication. And then of course, you know, everyone will tell you like read it again and again, go through it, check for typos and errors, because you know, depending on the competition, you know, I don't want to make it sound like a competition, but like, you know, it is depending on like the volume of submissions. That kind of stuff, you know, might make you seem like, you know, editors can tell what level of effort or like, you know, professionalism you've put into the submission. So just keeping all of those things in mind, I think, is good when submitting.
Yeah, I do often forget how many editors are writers themselves, and maybe most. I mean, so many editors are writers themselves. But yeah, Michelle, Shannon, Chelsea, do any of you want to weigh in? I'm just wondering how close to publication ready a piece needs to be.
For Fatal Flaw, I mean, I think we love working with writers. And so there will be times when we accept pieces that we want to work with the writer with a little bit more on edits. And sometimes that'll happen. And we just enjoy, I mean, for me, like it's kind of like a fun project of like empathy where I get to like kind of highlight the best parts that I see in a story, and like it just feels like a collaboration when we're editing. And so because of that, sometimes we will accept pieces that will need like a couple of rounds of edits going between us. But we also do notice if you are spot checking your writing, and we can tell if it's a first draft and all of that kind of stuff. So we want your best work, but we're happy to work with you to make your work the best.
Chelsea?
Yeah, I mean, similar to a lot of what's been said, especially by Rowana, with the idea of like the more submissions you get and the more submissions that you get that are print ready or publication ready, especially, I mean, at the main review, everybody is volunteer. So any time that's being given is being given for the love of literature. And so it's really a passion project when a genre editor decides to work with a writer. And as we've seen more a higher volume of submissions, we do have added work that comes with that, and then we get to choose, be a little bit more picky about what work that we decide to do more substantial edits with. I will say part of our process is galley proofs with the writer before publication. And what that means is that I'm looking at every single piece that's published before it's published. I'm the one that's copy editing it and adding. It goes to genre editors for like big things. And if there is a this should change, or we can't promise to publish it, like we'll have that conversation. We'll never accept something and then take away the acceptance kind of blindly. It'll be like, would you be willing to do a revision with this kind of goal in mind? And the writer has the freedom to say no, but it can be that sort of provisional acceptance. Those are becoming more and more rare, but regardless, there is a copy editing and sometimes line editing that just happens naturally during the publication process. And that's, you know, similar to what Shannon said. I really enjoy that. And I really love that, because that's a little bit more of a collaborative effort, and it gives craft elements for the writers to take forward and strengthen their writing. And then just on the idea of like how to get it publication ready, I also, you know, revision, which terrified me when I was a younger writer. But I really actually love that process now. And also finding folks who get your work and can workshop with you, can help you strengthen it. They get what you're trying to do and they can help make you better. And then the last one is put your work away for a while. I think a lot of what we sometimes have to say no to, or like seeds of ideas that are really wonderful and we're really energized by, but they just haven't been worked out enough. And it's pretty clear that someone wanted to rush to the publication process without sitting with the work for a little bit and coming back to it after a while to see how they can hone it or sharpen it.
Okay, great. Michelle, I did want to go ahead and talk cover letters. If you want to start with that subject, what should be included in cover letters that's actually helpful to editors, and what do you not want to see in cover letters?
I think for me, I mean, for my experience of cover letters that I send out and what I've gotten is sometimes like simpler is better. You know, I always like when people say hi, you know, I hope you're doing well and everything like that. That's always nice. And then they have their bio in there. I think sometimes I don't mind if people explain their work, but like they don't have to, you know, like I often think like a lot of the times, like my general rule of thumb is like the shorter the better, you know, like attached is this, you know, hope you enjoy reading them or look forward to hearing from you. Sometimes though, I do get surprised by cover letters. There was one that we got from one of our writers that we ended up publishing who was talking about being a Southerner, but also being a part of the global South, and talked about that in her cover letter, which really like took me back for a second because I was like, oh my gosh, this is someone who's like in the conversation and you know, is kind of like tipping their hat and everything like that. And that generally to me was like, to me, that got me excited about reading what was going to be, you know, attached in the email. So anything, I mean, if, you know, like shorter the better, but also like if you feel like that you have something that you want to say about how you fit into, if there's like a particular theme, or how you fit into like the magazine, if the magazine itself is for like a specific identity, or it's about, you know, a specific theme, touching on that, you know, that for us at my magazine, you know, shorter the better, but it, you know, sometimes adding a little flair in there is nice too, so.
I remember cover letters used to stress me out before I had publications until an editor told me that magazines are looking for debut publications. So then you realize you actually have something that a magazine wants, the fact that you've never published before. So then I just started writing, I'm seeking my first publication. Thank you for your consideration. But yeah, Shannon, Chelsea, Rowana, any take on cover letters? I'm also curious, like sometimes a magazine will say a cover letter's optional, but I'm wondering if it's actually okay not to submit one, or if you suggest always including one anyway.
I think they're polite. I will be honest that I read them second. I will read your work first, and then I'll read your cover letter second. Mainly because sometimes your cover letter will tell me what the story is about, and I guess I want to find out for myself. But it's always nice when people, you know, put thought into their cover letter, and I really do appreciate it. I agree with what Michelle said about shorter the better, but I do notice them, but I will read them second. Your work will speak first to me.
Okay. Chelsea?
I definitely agree with that.
Oh, Rowana. Oh, great. Do you have a cover letter section, Rowana, with your submissions and for Spoken Black Girl?
Sure. I mean, yeah, we do ask for a cover letter.
Okay.
I focus much more on the submission, and also, as you know, as publication is supportive of emerging writers, like having a ton of previous publications is not necessarily like more impressive, I guess, to me. So I would just put that out there for like any kind of newer or emerging writers. Like if you don't have a ton of publications behind your name, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah.
Okay, Shannon, I'm going to ask you to start us out on the subject of rejection. How should we as submitters think about rejection? Is it a necessary evil? Is it a spur for artistic and or personal growth? And how do we bounce back and keep going after the sting of rejection?
First of all, I think that rejection is like part of being a writer, definitely. As a writer, I get a ton of rejection letters. As Laura was talking about, she got like 60. I saw someone on Twitter have like a submittable Wrapped, and it like talked about how many rejections still pending and all of that stuff. I think that I like to think of rejection like Sylvia Plath said, like my rejections show me that I try. And but they can also be a really good thermometer for how well your story is doing and how if revisions are needed. So the way I'll do it is I'll send out my work, and if I'm getting non-form submission rejections where people are like, I loved this piece, I will tweak it a little bit. If I'm getting form rejections, I'm like, okay, well maybe I want to rework something so I can get more people's attention. And so I'll go back and revise. And like for me, it's basically a temperature check of, is my work being read the way that I intend it to? But yes, I think it's a necessary evil of writing, and I'm trying to get used to it. They can feel pretty personal sometimes, and I understand that. I just keep going. I think keep going is my didn't you say, Laura, that you got rejected 6 times from a magazine and the 7th was your charm?
Oh yeah, and it wasn't even personal encouraging rejections. It was just a form, like a solid form letter. But
so
yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry. I just saw a question in chat. What is a form and non-form rejection letter? So to make our lives easier, we will we'll have a rejection as a literary magazine, a form rejection. So it'll be like, thank you for submitting your work. It depends. All of ours, I don't even have ours memorized, but we'll send it out to those people. And a non-form is when the editor goes in and writes in a message. And this can be as simple as, we hope you submit again. And at Fatal Flaw, we really mean it. If we have written that, we have gone out of our way to write that. And they could also point to, I know that our lovely poetry editor Chelsea will point to things that she really enjoyed about a poem to really be encouraging, and those things are non-form. The form is the one that we send out for everybody, and there was this website that had like every literary magazine's form versus non-form rejections. You can actually Google them sometimes. I don't think ours is quite there yet, but that's what a non versus form rejection is.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share your take on rejection? I'm also curious if you think there are examples of good rejection policies for magazines. Okay, then we're going to stop talking about rejection.
I can say something.
Let's do it. No, please.
It's hard because y'all can't see me because I'm like laughing and smiling. I'm just like, this is screen. But yeah, like I definitely think rejection is part of the part of the writing life. I think the way that I try to think of it as like, it's just one of the many doors that isn't like the right one for you to go through, or it's like a path that it's like taking you in like a different direction or something like that. I don't know if you see my submittable, I just have like tons and tons of like, the little gray squares and stuff like that. And I'm bad too. I self-reject, like I will withdraw something, because I'll have like second thoughts about it or something like that, or, is the work ever done? But, I know it's really hard and people, take it personally sometimes, and it is hard to navigate. It's not fun when you check your phone first thing in the morning and you see a rejection letter. Like that's, the best way to start your day, I guess. I know over at Sussurus, we talk a lot about like, when's the best time to send a rejection letter? Do we want to send them on a Friday or on a Sunday night? What's the best day? Is it a Monday? I don't know. But like I think at least I can speak for me and my other editors. We try to be very encouraging in our rejection letters and talk about the things that we really admired about a piece. I always think there's something you can kind of like pick out that a writer's doing well, and kind of like point them in that direction, and point out the strengths of a piece. Because, they may work on it some more and eventually like send it back to you in like a different draft or something like that. So rejection is kind of just like pointing you in a different direction. But I also agree with Shannon that sometimes if you get too many on a piece, maybe you need to like relook at it. It's hard to know what that is for sure, if that's self-doubt or not creeping in. But anyways, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I know for me, rejections were stinging so much I had to do that whole like movement to aim for a certain amount of rejections a year, and it's just about getting your work out there. But it does make you feel like you're meeting a goal when you get to check mark another rejection. You still got to do the work and look the magazines up and know you're getting them to the right place, but that has actually worked for me. There are so many chat questions coming up about rejection. But I'm gonna ask Chelsea, how long does it take for the main review to actually respond? And what do you do about form versus, personal, etc.?
Yeah, and I mean, and like I mentioned in the chat, so I've been using the chat to answer questions so that I'm not just like talking a whole bunch. So you might see me in there. But there are many reasons why a piece might be rejected. And we also have a form rejection, but we also do what we call encouraging or very encouraging rejections, where we kind of what Shannon was saying, like we mean it. Send us additional work, or this is what we really loved about your piece. If you revise it, like do more of that, or at least don't change that, right? Like that's, we try to give a little bit of encouragement in that way. One of the reasons that we end up rejecting pieces is if they don't follow guidelines, if they have their name. So we read blind, which means that our readers do not see the name of the name that pops up or connects to the submission via Submittable, which is the platform we use. So if they somehow have their name in the document, if they have their name in the title that the reader can see, it isn't fair. That is part of the process we use to make sure that it's an even playing field for, maybe a really decorated, high published writer and an emerging writer, or someone who doesn't have as many publications. We don't want even that like implicit bias of, oh, well, obviously this is going to be super good. And maybe it's not, maybe it just doesn't fit, whatever. So it should follow guidelines. And I saw something about the guidelines and like that they're confusing for no reason, or do we know how confusing they are? We try to be very clear about our guidelines and for each of the genres, especially word counts, what to include, blind submissions, no names, how many poems to submit. That's another thing that will automatically have us reject you if you send 5 poems, because that's not really fair to somebody who followed and only sent 3, and we have to look at 3 of their best work and you get 5 chances. And so again, as we've gotten more and more submissions, we've realized that to be an even playing field, we really do have to align ourselves with the guidelines that we set. And our inboxes are always open if folks have questions, if folks need clarity on the guidelines. I am a writer myself and I submit a lot, and I know how time consuming it can be to make sure that you're following every single guideline for the many different journals that you're submitting to. And it is time consuming. Somebody wants 12 fonts, somebody wants a double space, somebody wants a single space, somebody, you can do 3 poems here, 5 here, you got to change your packets up, whatever it is. And it is what I found just like a part of the process. And to put my best foot forward means following the guidelines as closely as I can. And if I have a question about them, I will typically ask. But there is some truth that like a lot of it is some internal language and lingo. And I specifically teach a class around like how to submit for publication, where we go over things like writing cover letters and bios and what form rejections mean and all of those things, because it can kind of feel like a little club, which is why events like this are so important, and classes like the one I teach is helpful, because it can help you unpack what those guidelines mean, and it then puts your best work forward and gets you more likely to get that acceptance. Oh, and I'm sorry, I didn't mention our guideline is 6 months. So that's another thing. We ask that you wait 6 months before inquiring about your submission. That's different for everybody. Some people don't even have an inquiry guideline. And if they don't, I will typically still wait 6 months. It can be grueling. It can feel really long. You just want them to like read it. At the main review, in progress doesn't always mean that it's like being read right at that moment. And so a lot of writers will be like, hey, I see that it's in progress and it's been like that for 3 weeks. You know, what's the answer? And, you know, we don't take anybody out of the running for asking about their work. But if you're emailing us 3 weeks or 3 months after, and we've asked for 6, we kind of just like make a note of like, it does take time, and we have a lot of steps, a lot of processes. It's a high collaborative. 2 readers read every single piece, that kind of thing, to make sure that we're doing our due diligence as well. So it just takes time.
Yeah, I have to really try not to look at my submittable account often. It's takes a lot of discipline, and it's hard not to do. But it's amazing how quickly time's going, and I do want to shift to acceptance. So I know that all of you are also handing out acceptances. Rowana, there's often an editing process. How should a writer interpret a piece that comes back with maybe heavier edits than anticipated? And what if there's an editor that I, as a writer, don't agree with?
So the first part was, what if a piece comes back with like more edits than you had anticipated? I would say that that's, you know, a good thing. You got accepted, and then you got connected with a very passionate editor who wants to bring out the best in your work. Like, sometimes I will even, you know, write a little note to the writer, like, don't be alarmed by the amount of edits. Like, it's a good thing. Like, there's a lot to work with here, and I'm just seeing, you know, all of the different areas that we can highlight and make stronger. So I would say, you know, editing is great. Like, if you meet someone who like really wants to like dive into your work with you, like that's a beautiful thing. So I would say don't be put off by that. And can you repeat the second part?
Yeah, do you ever have a writer just disagree with an edit, and how does that process work if they don't want to maybe take an edit that you have?
You know what? That's why it's important to have, you know, a couple of editors or like an editorial team where you can like kind of maybe pass this on to someone else and be kind of like, hey, am I on the right track with this? Like, what do you think? And then if you can get like a consensus like on your editorial team on like what you like, whether, you know, it is acceptable as it is or whether that absolutely needs to change for publication, I think that's a good place to start, like, you know, moving forward. But just like from a writer's standpoint, I would say that, you know, it's always, unless it's absolutely like against the your principles, and it's like, you know, this is not what this piece represents at all. Just to kind of like be open to like what your piece could possibly become, because, you know, the editors are going to see see your work in a different light and see the potential of your work in a different way. So yeah, definitely getting more minds involved. Like, you know, maybe it is just you as the editor, like, you know, thinking something should be one way, and then, but if I ask like my other editors and they're like, yeah, absolutely, I agree with you, Rowana, then I'm just like, okay. Yeah, I'm gonna relay that to the writer.
Yeah. Other thoughts on editing a piece after acceptance? Any examples any of you other panelists want to share?
There'll be times when I spend a lot of time on my edits. I try really hard to make the piece the best it can be, because I want the writer to be as proud of the piece as possible. So when they send it back and they don't agree with one of my edits, sometimes we'll go back and forth, but really I honor what the writer's vision is more than my own, because I know that I'm sort of like a translator when I'm editing as well. And so I try I want them to be happy with it more than anything. I want to celebrate their work. And so we'll do back and forth, and hopefully by the time we're finished for publication, everyone is super happy with it. But like that being said, there are some times where writers will come back and I'll be like, I wish it had this part in it or back. And but we publish it the way the writer wants, because ultimately it's their work and I want them to be happy with it more than me.
Yeah, I love getting edits. I love having an editor tell me what they think about my work and how they think it should be. But I did want to quickly talk about acceptance etiquette. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Chelsea.
I just wanted to name one thing about like the challenges with being a strictly online journal. Some edits are constrained by like the platform or the website being used. And so sometimes that's the formatting of a piece. How like prose poetry is a really good example, where if you want the margins really big, and maybe the platform that you're using, like WordPress, kind of has bigger margins, and so you can't get the text all the way across. Like some of that just takes some creative thinking with the writers, and we do have kind of a note about that. Like we can't promise, as an online journal, we can't promise that the formatting, if you have really particular formatting, we do visual poetry. And so we do our best to like upload these really intricate, visuals with like words over them and stuff. And so we just really work with the writer to do our best, but sometimes revisions just for sheer formatting needs, they do come up as well. And like Shannon was saying, like working collaboratively. But yeah, I just wanted to name that as a 21st century problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to start with Michelle on this one. I want to talk a little about acceptance etiquette. So it's my understanding when you're offered acceptance, you just take it no matter what. Don't submit your work to a magazine that you might not accept an offer from. My personal strategy is to submit a story simultaneously to about 10 places and immediately withdraw from other magazines upon acceptance. So I just never want to be in the position of saying, oh, oops, that piece is no longer available. But yeah, Michelle, when a piece is accepted, what's the best way for the writer to respond to you, start a working relationship with you? And when is it okay to post about the acceptance online?
Well, that's a good one, because I kind of, it's interesting because we've actually had a lot of people respond when they get a rejection letter from us online. But it's good because they're usually feel encouraged after the rejection letter, which means a lot to me, because I don't know. Like, I think that's the thing, especially, as an editor, that you see and that kind of changes you a little bit as a writer, is that like, we're all rooting for you. Like, we want your stuff to get in, we really do. Like, I never open up an email. We do emails over at Sisters. We don't have submittable, but I never open up an email and click on a piece and go like, oh, I hope I don't like this, So I think like in terms of acceptance, I mean, if people want to celebrate online, like, I'm happy about that, like I want them to kind of like experience that joy and share with people. And, for us, it's kind of like joining, a little community. Usually what we do with an acceptance is that we tend to afterwards, a little bit before the magazine officially launches, we'll send people like a little page proof to make sure that they're happy with everything. That's kind of a new thing that we've learned to do, just to make sure, like on the day of, there's not any kind of like little snafu or anything like that, or people emailing us going, oh my gosh, there's a comma in the wrong place, and I'm not like proud and happy. We want that joy to be there. So I mean, if there's any like don'ts, it's don't show your page proof to people, even if you're really excited about it, not yet. But but acceptance, yeah, like celebrate. Absolutely.
Yes. Anyone else want to add to that? And then I'm going to start looking at some audience questions. Shannon, I saw you unmute.
Yeah, I actually, as a writer, don't always know if like I'm supposed to share my acceptance either. So, but from a magazine standpoint, like I also answer a question that I saw in chat earlier is when we're forming a magazine, we at least at Fatal Flaw, we're forming an issue. And so sometimes we will send out our acceptances before our rejections. And so I'm like very conscious of that online too, of like, okay, I don't want anybody to feel like discouraged. I always want people to feel encouraged with their writing. I don't know if we've ever had people say that they were accepted beforehand, but that's totally fine. But the one thing I think about is sometimes we change our publication date. And so sometimes we'll be like, people will tweet like, oh, it's being published on this date. But I mean, sometimes life happens and we publish on a different date. So just follow the guidance from your magazine that will normally give it. Like we'll be like, I think this is the publication date, but it may change.
Just looking at a quick audience question, do you, and I've always wondered this myself, do you typically start reading submissions after your reading deadline or your reading window deadline, or do you start that process before it ends?
I'll go. It depends how organized I am. Okay, so this is the way it works at Fatal Flaw is we have 5 amazing fiction readers who are reading our flash and our fiction, and they push forward things they're excited to talk about. And we also will read as the editorial board will also read others as well. But sometimes I'm reading all of your submissions within a week, and sometimes I'm more organized and reading it as they come. And that's the better way to do it. But I will sometimes procrastinate and read a lot at once. But generally, the readers don't really have a choice. They have to kind of read things as they come, unless they want to read like 40 stories in one weekend.
Okay, I'm supposed to hand this back to Paul, but I'm going to give just one more question. I always want to know pet peeves, like pet peeves in writing, like writing themes you see too much of, pet peeves in a cover letter, just a way a writer communicates with you. Is there anything that just kind of turns you off with a submission? Rowana, do you want to start that one?
Sure, I was thinking about it as you were speaking. I would say, in terms of font and font color and things like that, just try to keep it uniform. It's a little distracting when it's like, size 20, like red font, or like, unless it's like, kind of like a visual poetry piece, kind of like what Chelsea was talking about, like if that's like part of the art, like yeah, I get that, but for the most part, trying to keep it a bit uniform, or at least that's my taste and my
yeah. Anyone else have a quick one? Chelsea, anything that just really doesn't work for you?
I mean, I manage multiple like email accounts for the journal, and including the info at one, which is great because it's like the first line of, I mean, you can really email anybody in the organization, but it's where we get the most traffic, obviously. And I would just say like random emails of like, hey, read my work, here it is, it's attached. When we have like, that's not part of our submission process, or just random, like they don't know anything about the journal, and it's evident that they, I mean, one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is being as accessible as possible, meaning that people don't have to pay to read our work. Everything's online and it's free. And it's not to say like people have to like read tons, but if you don't even know that we're online only and you're like, can't wait to see this in print, I'm like, oh, like now I've got to break it to you that, you know, because you didn't read through or you didn't do a little bit of research, and also the guidelines thing, just because that's a little bit more like back and forth that our lovely readers and that our lovely genre editors would love to be using to read all of the submissions, rather than having to like wrestle with logistics, which everybody dislikes. So I think, you know, those kind of little things, and they're few and far between. And we always respond with like respect and care and generosity. We all know that everybody's just out here trying to share their work, and are excited about their work, but that's just one thing.
Okay, well,
My small pet
no,
peeve
go
is
ahead.
going over the word count. We have 7,000 words available to you, and if you go over that word count, I will read your piece last. Like I will read it, but I'll be grumpy about it because 7,000 words is a lot of words. It's like over 25 pages, and if you're going like, especially if you're like 9,000 words, you're really pushing my buttons.
Michelle, do you want to offer us a pet peeve and then I'll turn it back over to Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with like not knowing the magazine. So our front page literally says a literary arts magazine of the American South, and we get people that don't meet that. And then I have to cut, you know, and it's kind of discouraging because it is on the submit page, it is on the front page of the website. So I'm just kind of like, I don't know, did you read the first sentence on the guidelines page? So that also, because for us, we do email. It's very obvious when people BCC hundreds of magazines at once. I don't know how people keep up with that. But you know, like a very quick way of discerning that is like, to whom it may concern, or to editors or something like that. You know, it's like it feels very kind of impersonal and removed like that. But yeah, it's really those two things. So I hate turning people down, but I'm also like, dang man, didn't you look at the front page of the website?
Okay, well, part of my job is being timekeeper, so I'm going to have to cut this off. And thank you so much to our panelists for your insights, and thanks for the audience for being so engaged. I know I wasn't able to get to a ton of the chat questions, but Paul, take it away.
Great, thank you, Laura, and thank you so much to all of you, to all of our panelists, and to everyone for joining us this evening. So yeah, let's keep this conversation going. Invite you to come find us on social media, on Twitter at Fatal Flaw Lit. I think we'd love to look for ways to keep talking about some of the questions that folks have raised in the chat tonight. You know, there's a lot to talk about here. And as I said at the beginning, this is the first of a series of salons on topics that we hope are of interest to folks, especially to writers and artists, emerging writers and artists especially. We will be back online on March 23rd with our next virtual reading, which is going to feature writers from Fatal Flaw's own pages. In April, we'll come back together for an in-person reading in New York City. And then in June, I think, is our next salon, which will also take place in New York in person. And of course, as Shannon mentioned at the top of the conversation, Fatal Flaws submissions are open. I'm not sure if Shannon mentioned that actually, but I'm mentioning it. So
open.
find us on Submittable. And I hope.
Yeah, we're open. I didn't say this, but we accept visual art, flash fiction, fiction, poetry, and nonfiction. And we'd love to hear it. Our topic is agency this time. I don't if anyone else would like to plug their submissions being open, it is your time to do so.
Go for it.
Our subs are open until March 15th. Woohoo!
Anyone else open?
Our submissions are open. We have free submissions for Black History Month, which anybody and everybody can submit during. And that is from now until the 22nd. And then after that, it'll return back to the $3 per submission, which ends like through March 31st. And then I also just included the class that I teach. I included the link in the chat because I have a module coming up. It's a 3-part class coming up that starts February 19th. So that's in there as well.
Thank you everyone for coming. I'm so happy to have hear your questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get to some of them, but feel free to reach out to me on social media. I'm happy to discuss this further at any time.
Yeah, we will keep the conversation going. So thank you again. Thank you, Laura. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all of you. Please keep in touch, and happy submitting, and have a great night.